When Patty Pruitt was incarcerated, Jane, her daughter, was only 16 years old. She stepped into a mother role for her younger siblings and an advocate for Patty's freedom. And she's joining us virtually. Jane, it's so good to talk to you.
Hi.
I'm really curious how you feel having your mother home and all of your work, all of your hopes, all of your dreams coming true with having her home.
It's been amazing, of course. I was at the visiting room with her when we received word. They just kind of had us exit the visiting room together, and then we got to hang out in a conference room for a couple hours. And then while they did all the paperwork and got everything sorted out, and then we couldn't believe it that we were getting to walk out together, and it's been great. We've had a few weeks of just as much as we want of each other, which is great.
That is great. And you really worked to help your mother fight for her innocence. What all did you do?
I tried early on before internet and everything. We just had paper petitions. So my mom's sister, my Aunt Mary, and I would try to get as many signatures as we could to get whatever governor was in office to hear us. And then as time went on with the internet, it was much easier through social media and websites that take care of that. But I also joined lots of organizations over the years, from the Midwest Innocence Project to the National Innocence Project, Missouri Cure, Missouri Prison Reform, and, Families Against Mandatory Minimums. And I took classes online mostly and attended events and tried to network and meet anybody that I felt could help our cause. And I tried to do whatever Mom's attorney, when Brian Reichart came onto the case 14 years ago, from that point on, he was someone that could give me assignments or help me know what he would need help with.
Why did you maintain your belief so deeply in your mother's innocence?
I always believed her, and I always believed my younger sisters that they saw a flashlight under the door. I also saw Mom's bruised body. I saw horrible bruises from her hip bones to her knees. She was definitely hurt that night and had knife marks on her neck. And then we were also harassed at the house after Dad was gone. We had some scary things in our lives, and it all was part of, what we were going through together.
Well, Lonnie, you did a really deep dive on this case. And what evidence did you find that was said to be lost?
Yeah, Dr. Phil, we came onto this case about 7 years ago. And the Innocence Project recommended it as a case that was really important and should be looked at as a wrongful conviction case. And we did a lot of different things to try and determine really, innocence or guilt, how we could prove that. And it got to the point where we could not come up with anything definitive. And we realized really Patty needed something new, right? A new piece of evidence to try and take to court and get a new trial, if anything. And so we asked, what about DNA testing? Now we could be doing DNA testing on this stuff. And the attorney, Brian, said, oh, no, we were told all of the physical evidence was destroyed. Not just us told that, but for decades, Patty's attorneys have been told all of the physical evidence was destroyed. And I remember one night, late night, in the hotel room with the showrunner of our docuseries saying, what can we do? And I said, you know what? We can't give up. I've heard this over and over again. Evidence was destroyed. It was burned in a fire. It was lost. Don't believe that. Be relentless and try and find it. And so our producers did for weeks and weeks and weeks. And finally, they actually found it. They got somebody in one of the evidence lockers, one supervisor who went in and came up with bags and bags of evidence. It was shocking to us. It was shocking to the attorneys. It was shocking to everyone involved. And in that evidence, Dr. Phil, Patty's pajamas were still there. And when we looked at the picture of her bottoms, there was evidence there that looked like it could be consistent with a sexual assault, which was a very important part of Patty's story that no one believed. There was what looked like blood stains and what looked like it could be a DNA stain. And we said, oh my goodness, here you have something you can take in, get it tested for DNA. Well, Brian was an excellent attorney, took it in and asked to be allowed to do DNA testing. And he was denied that opportunity to be able to test for DNA.
What was the reason? Why did they say that they wouldn't test it?
Well, this is really shocking. So this whole case, we've talked about this, it really stemmed around sexism, right? Sexism in the investigation, sexism in the prosecution, sexism in the way it was presented at trial. And something that was said in the trial stuck out to the judge who was ruling on the DNA. He said, I remember that this case, Patty said something about her sexual engine is hotter than most people or something to that effect. And the defense attorney said, oh, no. Patty didn't say that. That was the investigator who said that. That's the investigator who said she made all of these statements, but it was never recorded. And the judge said, well, regardless, whoever said it, that's something I heard in court and I remember it. That's what makes this case so unique. And that really tainted the judge in deciding whether he could even test this DNA or not. I mean, it would have been nothing for the court to just say, go ahead and test the DNA, right? And if there's a chance that you can prove that this person is innocent after all of these years, why not test it? But he denied that.
This is what was said. The lead investigator on the case asserted that she said that. The court, that may be, but I heard testimony that's been remembered because that makes this case unique. But they had no record of it.
Right, and the judge didn't realize there's a big difference between the detective saying she said that and Patty actually saying, yes, I said that. She never said she said. She always denied all of those statements that this detective said she made. When it was not recorded, it was a statement that was never recorded.
Patty, you've maintained you never said that, correct?
No, nobody ever said anything like that. No, I did not.
Yeah, particularly in that setting, I don't know why you would say something like that.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, of course not. All right, well, there's more to this. When we come back, Patty's attorney said the investigators did a swab of Patty's hands. She'll tell us what they found next, and then there's more. We'll be right back. These are the prosecutor's argument for Patty's guilt. Among other things, he said, the dignity of the institution of marriage requires a conviction. Now, what does that have to do with somebody being shot or not?
A conviction for murder. For murder.
For murder.
Yeah.
I mean, how does the judge even allow that? Money lessons can be hard-earned, especially when it comes to making the most of finances. Keeping all savings in one place may seem smart, but it doesn't allow money to grow effectively. Well, today's episode sponsor, Acorns, is here to help. Acorns is a financial wellness app that makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that matches you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. It only takes 5 minutes to set up an account. So take that first small, simple step to getting your money back on track. Sign up now and join the over 13 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $22 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/Dr. Phil or download the Acorns app to get started right now.
Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Dr. Phil.
Well, Patty Pruitt has been released from prison, and we are so excited about that. After nearly 4 decades behind bars, I personally think that's 4 decades too late. I don't think she should have ever gone to prison to begin with. She was convicted in 1986 for the murder of her husband, a crime she has consistently denied committing. Despite her release, Patty faces the constraints of lifetime parole, a condition that brings both relief and challenges for her. Lonnie Coombs is joining me, former LA prosecutor who has really taken a deep dive on this case. She and I have worked on it together and separately. And Lonnie, I think that this was a very prejudicial prosecution. I mean, the prosecutors are intended to seek justice, not convictions. Fair statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that this was a very tunnel vision prosecution. I think Patty seems to be the only one they ever looked at. And the prosecutor seemed to me to be very misogynistic and made comments to the jury that I thought were prejudicial against Patty. who had had affairs in her marriage earlier on. She and her husband had gotten past that, but I want to take a look at some of the things the prosecutor said to the jury. These are the prosecutor's argument for Patty's guilt, among other things. He said, the dignity of the institution of marriage requires a conviction. Now, what does that have to do with somebody being shot or not? The dignity of the institution of marriage requires a conviction.
A conviction for murder. For murder.
For murder.
Yeah.
I mean, how does the judge even allow that? He says she defiled his home with those lovers when children were there. She abandoned her duties as a mother of her children. He goes on. She was motivated by sheer greed and sexual lust and had been for years. She pursued one sleazy affair after another, 1, 2 at a time. And when you look at those things, not one of those statements had anything to do with she picked up a gun and shot this man.
That's right. That's right. They literally just painted her as this evil woman. And apparently that worked in Missouri in the 80s. You know, we talked to Patty's trial attorney and we said, what happened in the trial? And he said, Patty was convicted of adultery. That's what she was convicted of. He said in the 80s in Missouri, it was more like the 50s for women. And he said as soon as that jury heard about the affairs, which the prosecution put on ad nauseum, that was it. She was immoral, therefore she was guilty.
And they had what they considered physical evidence. They had a boot print.
Mm-hmm.
And the boot print by the pond, there was a pond where a gun was found.
Right.
And there was a boot print there. One boot print.
Mm-hmm.
Unless Patty is a pogo stick in disguise, how did one boot print get there unless it had been there a long time and the others washed away? How did they determine this is part of the fact pattern for the night of the murder?
Yeah, it didn't really make sense. So there's a pond on the Pruitt land, and that's where the murder weapon was found, which, by the way, Patty told the police that they had 2 guns and one was missing, and that ended up being the murder weapon. It was in the pond. They said there were boot prints around the edge of the pond, which matched some boots of Patty's. Well, that makes sense. She lives there. She's gone to the pond before. But there was one boot print that matched her boots that was near to where the gun had been lodged in the pond. The interesting thing, Dr. Phil, not only was it just one boot print, like you said, how there's only one boot print up there, but they dredged that pond to find the gun. It was so muddy, they had to build a bridge to be able to walk out to that boot print. If it was that muddy, if she'd been in that with those boots would have been soaked and caked with mud inside and outside. They probably would have stuck in the pond. It doesn't even make sense.
Well, let's look at the boots. If we look at the shoestrings, there's no mud on the shoestrings. If we look on either one of them, there's no mud on the shoestrings. Then here's the top of the boots, the white packing, there's no mud on that. The toes of the boots, there's no mud above there's just on the bottom.
They're clean, yeah. Yeah.
How do you, it just doesn't make sense. It does not add up.
No, and they had a neighbor who came over to get some clothes and shoes for Patty and her kids, because of course they just ran off in the middle of the night. She said she saw those boots. They were wet, so she didn't bring them to Patty, but she said she never saw mud like that caked on. She thought that the prosecution, when they presented it to the jury, they'd actually added some mud to it, because she said, I saw them that night. They didn't have mud on them. They were wet, but not muddy.
And then she actually had some injuries, and they actually suggested they were self-inflicted. We'll talk about that after the break. How have you kept your spirit so positive when you look at these kind of injustices and knowing that you didn't get every possible consideration when they take your freedom away? $36 trillion. That is the U.S. debt, and it gets deeper and deeper by the day. Our debt has never been higher, nor have the stakes. The government is looking to slash the federal budget by $2 trillion, and no one knows what that will mean for your job, savings, and future. I've seen a lot in my time, and there's one thing I know for sure. You need to prepare before it's too late. I trust Preserve Gold to help protect my wealth and I strongly urge you to do the same. They are the only precious metals firm I trust and recommend to my family, friends, and audience, and they have a special offer just for you. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue throughout 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 today. Well, we're back with recently released Patty Pruitt, the longest-serving female prisoner in Missouri prison history. Her daughter Jane is here. Jane was 16 when Patty was incarcerated, and they've been really glad to see each other. Lonnie Coombs, anchor here for Merit TV News and former LA prosecutor, is joining me. Patty, when you hear us talk about this evidence, what's your reaction? What do you think about all of this when you hear us talk about it?
You are all perfectly right. And unfortunately, during the trial, I was too stupid to know what was going on. I didn't get it. But in retrospect, I see everything that was done incorrectly, unfairly, and sexist, completely sexist, the entire trial.
Well, I know it's got to be frustrating to you. And your story, of course, is that there was an intruder in the house. Jane, you say that your sister saw a flashlight under the door from the basement, and that your mother had injuries to herself that indicated that she had been assaulted. And there were injuries to your neck, Patty. Your recollection of this is that you were assaulted and a knife was held to your neck during that time. And this is why, Lonnie, DNA testing would be so important in all of this.
That's right. So important. Now, mind you, back then in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of DNA testing done. But since then, we've seen how much it's advanced, and it could clearly be helpful throughout the years and the decades as Patty's attorneys were fighting for this.
And they did a testing for gunshot residue, and the murder weapon was a shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that kind of weapon has a lot of blowback. There's a lot of residue in the air that could be not just on the hands, but over the entire body in a closed space.
That's right.
And Patty was tested for that.
For her hands. I believe her hands were tested.
Right.
And they were clean. Yeah. No GSR.
Yeah, no gunshot residue whatsoever. So this has to be just infuriating when you think about it. Patty, how have you kept your spirit so positive when you look at these kind of injustices and knowing that you didn't get every possible consideration when they take your freedom away?
Dr. Phil, I have children. I could never give up. I could never give up because of my children. Isn't that why we do what we do? Because we are loved ones. So I could never give up hope. And I still to this day, expect to be exonerated somehow.
Jane, how proud of your mother are you that she's maintained herself and continues this fight?
Unbelievably proud. She has stayed so strong and helped so many others. She stayed strong for all of us kids, all of our children, her grandchildren have all raised going to visit her, seeing her being positive, seeing her being loving. It's pretty amazing. But she deserves to be completely exonerated.
Well, I certainly think that to take someone's freedom away in this country is a very high standard, and they deserve due process. They deserve to have a fair trial, and people could disagree about the story. They could disagree as to whether the facts are right or the facts are wrong, but no one could disagree that she has not had due process. I mean, she did not get a fair trial. Do you have any disagreement with that, Lonnie?
No, none whatsoever. Between the focus, the tunnel focus from the very beginning that it was her, to evidence that was not disclosed to the defense, all the way through, and then to the sexist slant of the prosecution in the trial. None of that was fair. None of that was due process for her.
No doubt about it.